The year is 1940, spring. German forces are about to execute what military historians will call the most audacious invasion in modern warfare. They will cross terrain everyone said was impassable. They will fight without sleep for days on end. They will move so fast the enemy will break before understanding what hit them. But here is what the history books often miss. Inside the rucksack of nearly every soldier pushing through the Ardennes forest next to the ammunition and rations sits a small tin of pills. The label reads Pervitin. The active ingredient is methamphetamine. This is the story of how Nazi Germany became the first regime in history to dose its entire military with industrial quantities of hard stimulants. How that chemical gamble powered their early shocking victories, and how it contributed to the moral and strategic collapse that followed. We are going to show you the receipts, the production orders, the soldier letters, the medical reports, and the pharmaceutical documents that prove this happened. By the end, you will understand that the Third Reich was not just an ideological nightmare. It was also a massive drug experiment conducted on millions of people, and the results were catastrophic. Let's go back to 1937, Berlin. A pharmaceutical company called Temmler Werk is working on a new product. The chief chemist is a man named Fritz Hauskeld. According to research from the University of Texas at Tyler, Hauskeld synthesizes a methamphetamine compound, and the company decides to market it under the brand name Pervitin. The chemical itself, methamphetamine, was not new. Japanese chemist Nagai Nagyoshi had first synthesized it in 1893, and a more potent crystalline form was developed in Japan in 1919. But Pervitin represents something different. It is the first mass-market consumer version designed for everyday use by ordinary people. Temmler Werk releases Pervitin commercially in 1938. The marketing is aggressive and ubiquitous. This is not sold as a dangerous narcotic. It is sold as a miracle cure for fatigue, depression, and lack of focus. Advertisements appear in newspapers and magazines across Germany. One ad shows a smiling woman holding a box of Pervitin with the tagline, "Pervitin makes you fresh and alert." Pharmacies stock it without restriction. You can buy it over the counter in pill form or as chocolates called Hildebrand. Students use it to cram for exams. Factory workers use it to get through long shifts. Housewives use it to manage their energy. Within months, Pervitin becomes one of the best-selling pharmaceuticals in Germany. The appeal is obvious. Methamphetamine floods the brain with dopamine and norepinephrine. It eliminates the sensation of fatigue. It creates euphoria and confidence. It suppresses appetite. It makes you feel invincible for hours. The problem, of course, is that methamphetamine is one of the most addictive substances known to medical science, and prolonged use causes psychosis, cardiovascular damage, and neurological degradation. But in 1938, those consequences are not yet widely understood, or at least not widely advertised. Germany is buzzing, literally, on legal meth. Now the military takes notice. Enter Dr. Otto Rank, the director of the Research Institute of Defense Physiology at the Berlin Academy of Military Medicine. According to James Madison University research on super soldiers of World War II, Rank begins conducting experiments on university students in 1938 to measure the performance effects of Pervitin. He tests endurance, reaction time, and cognitive function. The results are striking. Subjects can stay awake and alert for far longer than normal. Physical performance improves, confidence skyrockets. Rank writes in his notes that Pervitin can eliminate the natural fatigue that limits military operations. He sees the tactical implications immediately. Modern warfare demands speed. The German military doctrine is built on rapid maneuver, overwhelming force, and psychological shock. If you can keep your soldiers awake and aggressive for 2 or 3 times longer than the enemy, you gain an enormous operational advantage. Rank begins lobbying senior military officials to adopt Pervitin as standard issue. His argument is simple. This drug can turn ordinary soldiers into super soldiers, at least for short bursts. The military is receptive. In 1939, as Germany prepares for war, the Wehrmacht begins distributing Pervitin on a trial basis to certain units. The feedback from commanders is enthusiastic. Soldiers report feeling tireless. Night marches become easier. Morale stays high even under brutal conditions. By the spring of 1940, the decision is made at the highest levels. Germany is about to launch its Western offensive, the invasion of France and the Low Countries. The plan depends on speed and surprise. The army will need to move faster and harder than anyone expects. Pervitin will be part of the arsenal. Here is the smoking gun. In April and May of 1940, the Wehrmacht issues what historians call the stimulant decree. According to a PubMed article titled Methamphetamine for Hitler's Germany 1937 to 1945, written by Dr. Wolf Kemper, German military logistics records show that over 35 million tablets of Pervitin are shipped to Army and Air Force units in preparation for the Western offensive. Let me repeat that. 35 million tablets in 2 months. These are not experimental batches. This is industrial-scale pharmacological warfare. The tablets come in small tins, easy to carry, easy to distribute. The standard dose is 1 or 2 tablets, but many soldiers take more. Front-line units receive the largest quantities. Panzer crews, reconnaissance battalions, paratroopers, and bomber pilots are prioritized. The goal is to eliminate the need for sleep during the critical opening days of the campaign. Commanders are told that Pervitin will allow continuous operations for 36 to 48 hours without rest. In practice, some units stay active even longer, but we will get to that. May 10, 1940. Germany launches Fall Gelb, case yellow, the invasion of Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. The world watches in shock as German armored columns race through the Ardennes forest, a region the French High Command considered impassable for tanks. The panzers move day and night. There is no pause, no rest. Troops that should be collapsing from exhaustion keep moving. The Allies are caught completely off guard. The speed of the German advance is unprecedented. In just 10 days, German forces reach the English Channel, cutting off the British Expeditionary Force and the best of the French army. Within 6 weeks, France surrenders. Military historians have debated for decades how this happened. Superior tactics, yes. Better coordination between tanks and airplanes, yes. Weaknesses in French command structure, absolutely. But there is another factor that often goes unmentioned or understated. The German soldiers were chemically enhanced. They were running on methamphetamine. Let's hear from the soldiers themselves. One Wehrmacht medical officer, Dr. Heinrich Boll, who would later become a Nobel Prize-winning author, wrote letters home during the campaign. In one letter dated May 20, 1940, he writes to his family, "It's tough out here, and I hope you'll understand if I'm only able to write to you once every 2 to 4 days soon. Today I'm writing you mainly to ask for some Pervitin." He goes on, "I'm working a lot. Can you get the Pervitin for me so I can have it on hand?" These letters, now published, are cited in multiple academic papers on Pervitin use. Boll is not an isolated case. Numerous letters and diaries from soldiers in 1940 mention Pervitin by name. They call it pilot's salt or tank chocolate. They describe the sensation of boundless energy, the vanishing of fear, the ability to march and fight without sleep for days. One Panzer crew member writes, "After taking Pervitin, I felt like I could drive forever. The exhaustion just disappeared." Another soldier stationed in Poland writes to his family asking them to send more Pervitin because the official supply is irregular and he has become dependent on it to function. These are not covert or shameful requests. Pervitin is seen as a normal and even patriotic tool. The regime has framed it as a technological advantage, no different from better rifles or radios. Let's connect the pills to the tactics. The Ardennes offensive succeeds because German forces do not stop. French and British commanders expect periodic halts for rest, resupply, and consolidation. That is how armies traditionally move. But the Germans do not halt. On May 13th, General Heinz Guderian's panzers crossed the Meuse River at Sedan. Instead of pausing to wait for infantry support, Guderian orders his tanks to keep driving west. His superiors are alarmed. They order him to stop. He ignores them. His tanks roll through the night. Crews are awake for 40 hours straight. By May 15th, German spearheads are 50 miles behind French lines. The French have no idea where the main German force is because it has moved farther and faster than their intelligence models predicted. This is chemically assisted warfare. The human body has limits. Soldiers need sleep. Reaction times degrade after 18 to 20 hours without rest. Judgment falters. Coordination breaks down. But methamphetamine overrides those biological signals, at least temporarily. It keeps the dopamine flowing. It keeps the adrenaline pumping. For the first weeks of the campaign, it works. The Blitzkrieg is not just a tactical innovation. It is also a pharmacological one. But let's be very clear about what methamphetamine does to the human body and mind when used at scale and under stress. According to Dr. Peter Steinkamp, a medical historian who has written extensively on Nazi pharmaceutical policy, methamphetamine produces short-term performance gains, but at enormous hidden cost. In the first hours after ingestion, users experience euphoria, increased alertness, reduced appetite, and a sense of invincibility. Reaction times improve, physical endurance extends, but methamphetamine is neurotoxic. It damages dopamine and serotonin receptors in the brain. After the initial high wears off, usually 6 to 8 hours, users experience a crash characterized by extreme fatigue, depression, irritability, and paranoia. The natural response is to take another dose and another. This creates rapid psychological dependence. After several days of continuous use, which is exactly what happened during the 1940 campaign, users begin to experience hallucinations, delusions, aggression, and impaired judgment. Cardiovascular strain increases, heart rates stay elevated, blood pressure spikes, risk of stroke and heart attack multiplies, sleep deprivation compounds all of these effects. Soldiers who stayed awake for 40 or 50 hours on Pervitin were not just tired. They were cognitively impaired, emotionally unstable, and physically damaged, even if they did not realize it at the time. And here is where the story turns dark in a different way. Wehrmacht medical officers begin reporting problems as early as summer 1940. Unit logs and medical reports, now archived and accessible to researchers, document increasing cases of what they call stimulant psychosis. Soldiers hallucinate. They see enemies that are not there. They become paranoid and aggressive toward their own comrades. Some experience heart palpitations and collapse. Others suffer what we would now call acute methamphetamine toxicity. Discipline begins to erode. Soldiers who are addicted to Pervitin become erratic and unreliable when they cannot get their dose. According to Dr. Kemper's research, the Wehrmacht medical leadership starts to realize they have created a problem. In July 1941, just over a year after the stimulant decree, the German government quietly adds Pervitin to the opium law, restricting its availability and requiring prescriptions. But this is largely a bureaucratic gesture. Military use continues. Commanders on the Eastern Front, where Germany invades the Soviet Union in June 1941, still distribute Pervitin widely. The fighting there is even more brutal and sustained than in France. Units are expected to operate in extreme cold, with limited supplies over vast distances. Pervitin is seen as essential. Temmler work continues production. Soldiers continue taking it, and the physical and psychological casualties mount. Let me give you a specific example from the Eastern Front. In December 1941, German forces are bogged down outside Moscow. The Soviet winter has arrived. Temperatures drop to -30 degrees Celsius. Supply lines are stretched. Soldiers are freezing and starving. Pervitin is distributed to keep men functional. One Wehrmacht doctor, whose diary is cited in the University of Texas research, writes that soldiers in his unit are consuming 5, 6, even 10 tablets a day. He describes cases of complete mental breakdown. Men stand in the snow talking to people who are not there. Others become violent and have to be restrained. Some simply collapse and cannot be revived. The doctor notes, and this is a direct quote from his diary, "The drug that was supposed to make us supermen is destroying us." This is not an isolated observation. Medical reports from 1941 and 1942 across multiple fronts describe widespread Pervitin addiction and associated health crises. Yet the drug remains in use because commanders believe that without it, performance will drop even further. They are trapped in a cycle. The soldiers are addicted. The military is addicted. The entire war machine is running on stimulants, and the crash is inevitable. Now we need to talk about a darker possibility, one that is harder to document but impossible to ignore. Did Pervitin contribute to the atrocities committed by German forces? This is a sensitive and complex question. According to Dr. Edward Westerman, a historian at Texas A&M University who specializes in Wehrmacht behavior, methamphetamine reduces empathy and fear while increasing aggression and risk-taking. Those are the pharmacological facts. We also know that German soldiers, police units, and SS formations participated in mass murder on an industrial scale across occupied Europe. They shot civilians. They burned villages. They herded millions into ghettos and extermination camps. The question is whether drug use facilitated or lowered the psychological barriers to participating in such violence. Dr. Westerman and others argue that while ideology and orders were the primary drivers of atrocity, substances like Pervitin likely played a supporting role by making soldiers more willing to follow brutal commands, less sensitive to the suffering of victims, and more capable of sustained participation in violence that would otherwise cause psychological breakdown. One Wehrmacht soldier, whose post-war testimony is cited in research by historian Norman Ohler, stated that after taking Pervitin he felt nothing while participating in a massacre of civilians in Ukraine. He described a sense of detachment, as if he were watching himself from outside his body. This is consistent with methamphetamine's effect on emotional processing. Again, let's be absolutely clear. Pervitin did not cause the Holocaust. Nazi ideology, leadership decisions, bureaucratic systems, and individual moral failures caused the Holocaust. But widespread stimulant use may have made it easier for ordinary soldiers to participate in acts that would otherwise have required overcoming natural human reluctance to harm the innocent. This is a hypothesis, not a proven fact, but it is one that researchers take seriously. Let's shift focus now to the top of the regime. Adolf Hitler himself. According to multiple biographical and medical sources, including research by Dr. Ohler in his book Blitzkrieg, Hitler began receiving daily injections from his personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, starting in 1936. Morell was not a specialist. He was a dermatologist with a dubious reputation, but he had a talent for making powerful people feel good. The injections Morell administered were a cocktail of substances. They included vitamins, glucose, hormones, and according to analysis of Morell's medical notes, which survived the war and are now held in archives, preparations that almost certainly contained methamphetamine or related stimulants. One product Morell frequently used was called Vitamultin, marketed as a vitamin supplement but containing methamphetamine. Morell's records, cited in the PubMed research by Dr. Kemper, show that he gave Hitler injections multiple times a day, especially during stressful periods. By 1940, Hitler was receiving intravenous drugs nearly every morning. Witnesses, including Albert Speer and other members of Hitler's inner circle, described the Führer as increasingly erratic, paranoid, and prone to wild mood swings. Speer noted in his memoirs that after receiving injections, Hitler would become animated and talkative, then crash into dark silence hours later. This is classic stimulant behavior. Now consider the implications. From 1941 onward, as the war turns against Germany, Hitler makes a series of catastrophic strategic decisions. He refuses to allow retreats, even when retreat is the only rational option. He orders offensives that have no chance of success and drain resources. He micromanages battlefield tactics from hundreds of miles away. He becomes obsessed with wonder weapons and grand projects instead of focusing on sustainable logistics. He distrusts his generals and purges competent officers. He escalates the genocide even as it diverts resources from the war effort. Are these the decisions of a clear-headed strategist? Or are they the decisions of someone whose brain chemistry has been fundamentally altered by years of intravenous stimulant use? Dr. Fritz Redlich, a psychiatrist who conducted a posthumous medical analysis of Hitler, concluded that by 1944, Hitler was likely suffering from stimulant-induced psychosis in addition to other health problems. His judgment was impaired, his mood regulation was broken, his ability to process reality was compromised, and he was still the supreme commander of the German military. The people around him, including Goering, who was addicted to morphine and other substances, were also chemically impaired. The leadership of Nazi Germany, in other words, was high, not metaphorically, literally. Think about specific moments. December 1944, the Ardennes again, but this time for the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West. Hitler orders this attack against the advice of nearly all his senior commanders. Germany does not have the fuel, the manpower, or the air cover to sustain a major offensive. The plan depends on capturing Allied fuel depots and achieving total surprise. It is a gamble born of desperation. Pervitin is once again distributed heavily to front-line units. German soldiers push forward in brutal winter conditions, just like 1940. For a few days, they achieve surprise and make gains. Then they stall. Fuel runs out. Air support never materializes, Allied reinforcements arrive, the offensive collapses. Thousands of German soldiers are killed or captured, equipment is lost, the Western Front is fatally weakened. Historians debate whether Hitler was delusional to order this offensive. But we should also ask whether his decision-making was distorted by the drugs Morell was injecting into him daily. We know from Morell's notes that in late 1944, Hitler was receiving even more frequent and potent injections, including a preparation called Eucodal, which is essentially oxycodone, a powerful opioid. Hitler was cycling between stimulants and opioids, uppers and downers. His brain was a chemical battlefield, and he was deciding the fate of millions. So let's arrive at the central question. Did Pervitin help Germany win battles, or did it help cause the collapse? The answer is both. In 1940, Pervitin contributed to German tactical success. It allowed soldiers and commanders to operate beyond normal human limits during critical moments. The invasion of France was faster and more shocking because German forces did not have to stop for rest as often as their enemies expected. In that narrow operational window, the drug worked as intended. But the cost was deferred, not eliminated. By 1941 and 1942, the Wehrmacht was dealing with widespread addiction, medical crises, and psychological breakdown. The drug that powered the Blitzkrieg became a crutch, then a liability. Soldiers who were dependent on Pervitin performed worse when supplies were irregular. Units with high stimulant use showed higher rates of indiscipline and erratic behavior. The long-term cognitive and physical damage reduced overall effectiveness. And at the strategic level, the reliance on stimulants encouraged a dangerous mindset. It fed the illusion that willpower and aggression could overcome material and logistical realities. It reinforced the Nazi leadership's belief in the superiority of the German soldier and the feasibility of rapid, decisive victories. This contributed to overreach. Germany invaded the Soviet Union expecting another quick victory, like France. Instead, they got a grinding war of attrition that their economy and military could not sustain. Pervitin did not cause that miscalculation, but the chemical confidence it provided certainly did not help. Let's also consider the moral dimension. Methamphetamine use degraded individual judgment and empathy. It made soldiers more willing to follow orders without question, more capable of enduring and inflicting suffering, more detached from the human consequences of their actions. This fed into the larger system of atrocity. The Nazi regime murdered 6 million Jews, millions of Soviet prisoners of war, Romani people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, and countless others. That genocide was a policy decision, planned and executed with bureaucratic precision. But it required tens of thousands of individuals to participate actively and hundreds of thousands to participate passively. Anything that lowered the psychological barriers to participation, including widespread drug use, contributed to the machinery of death. So when we ask whether Pervitin helped or hurt Germany, we have to answer on multiple levels. Tactically, short-term gain. Strategically, long-term loss. Morally, unmitigated catastrophe. And the story does not end in 1945. After the war, Pervitin remains available in Germany. According to pharmaceutical and legal records cited by Dr. Kemper, Pervitin and other methamphetamine products continue to be sold by prescription in West Germany throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Temmler Work, the company that created Pervitin, survives the war and continues operations. The drug is marketed for weight loss and depression. Doctors prescribe it. People take it. It is not until 1988 that methamphetamine is fully banned for medical use in Germany. 1988. That is 4 decades after the war. Think about that. The drug that powered the Wehrmacht, that contributed to addiction and atrocity on a massive scale, remained legally available for almost half a century after the regime that weaponized it was destroyed. Why? Because the medical and pharmaceutical establishments were slow to fully reckon with the dangers, because economic interests were at play, and because the broader culture had normalized stimulant use during the Nazi period in ways that persisted. And here is where we connect the past to the present. Today, millions of people around the world use prescription stimulants: Adderall, Ritalin, modafinil, and others. These are chemically related to methamphetamine. They are prescribed for ADHD, narcolepsy, and sometimes off-label for cognitive enhancement. Students take them to study longer. Professionals take them to work harder. Athletes take them to train more intensely. The rhetoric around these drugs sounds eerily similar to the marketing of Pervitin in the 1930s. They are framed as performance enhancers, as ways to overcome natural limits, as tools for success in a competitive world. Now, modern prescription stimulants are not identical to Pervitin. They are generally less potent, more carefully regulated, and prescribed under medical supervision. But the underlying logic is the same. We use drugs to push past fatigue, to extend working hours, to meet demands that are often unrealistic or unsustainable. And we often ignore or downplay the long-term costs: dependence, cardiovascular damage, psychological side effects, the erosion of natural rest and recovery. The Nazi experience with Pervitin is an extreme case, but it is also a warning. When we normalize the chemical enhancement of human performance, when we treat the body as a machine to be optimized rather than a living system with limits, when we prioritize short-term results over long-term health, we walk a dangerous path. We risk creating a culture where people feel they cannot compete or succeed without drugs, where employers and institutions expect chemically enhanced performance as the baseline, where the line between medicine and exploitation blurs. There are also military parallels today. The United States military, for example, has researched and in some cases used stimulants to enhance soldier performance. Modafinil has been issued to pilots and special operations forces to combat fatigue during extended missions. The ethical and medical debates around this are ongoing. How much can we push human performance before we cause harm? Who decides when the benefits outweigh the risks? What happens to soldiers after years of stimulant use? These are the same questions German military doctors were asking in 1941 and 1942, and they never found good answers. The lesson is not that all stimulant use is equivalent to Pervitin. It is not. But the lesson is that we must be vigilant, skeptical, and aware of history when we consider using drugs to overcome human limits, especially in contexts where individuals have limited autonomy, like the military, or where social and economic pressures coerce use, like high-pressure academic or professional environments. Let's return one more time to the core story and draw the threads together. Nazi Germany circulated methamphetamine on an unprecedented scale. Tens of millions of tablets were produced and distributed. Soldiers, civilians, and leaders consumed it regularly. In the short term, it contributed to military success by enabling operations that would otherwise have been impossible. The 1940 invasions were faster and more aggressive because German forces were chemically enhanced. But the long-term consequences were disastrous. Addiction spread through the military. Psychological and physical health deteriorated. Judgment and discipline eroded. Leaders made increasingly reckless decisions while under the influence of powerful drugs. The population suffered from widespread substance abuse. And the moral catastrophe of the Holocaust was facilitated, in part, by a drugged and desensitized perpetrator population. Pervitin did not alone lose the war for Germany. The regime lost the war because it invaded countries it could not defeat, because it made strategic blunders, because it was morally and ideologically bankrupt, and because the Allies mobilized greater resources and resolve. But Pervitin contributed to the collapse by amplifying the regime's worst tendencies, by creating an illusion of invincibility, by degrading the capacity for rational decision-making, and by exacting a brutal toll on the people who used it. The legacy of Pervitin is a cautionary tale. It is a story about the seductive promise of chemical enhancement and the hidden costs that come due. It is a story about how institutions and cultures can normalize dangerous practices in pursuit of short-term advantage. It is a story about the fragility of human judgment and the ease with which it can be distorted. And it is a reminder that the tools we create, whether weapons or drugs or technologies, reflect and amplify our values. The Nazi regime valued conquest, aggression, and the ruthless exploitation of human beings. They built a system that ran on hate, violence, and methamphetamine. That system collapsed, as it had to. But the mechanisms it used, the ways it pushed human bodies and minds beyond their limits in pursuit of power, those mechanisms did not disappear. They evolved. They persist in different forms in different contexts. Our job is to recognize them, to question them, and to resist the logic that says we must sacrifice health, humanity, and sustainability for the sake of performance or victory. The soldiers who marched through the Ardennes in May 1940 Many of them were ordinary people caught in extraordinary and terrible circumstances. They took the pills they were given. They followed the orders they received. Some of them committed atrocities. Some of them were victims. Most were both in different measures. The pills did not make them into monsters, but the pills made it easier for the regime to use them as instruments of monstrous policy. That is the lesson. Pervitin did not create the Third Reich, but it lubricated its machinery. It made the machine run faster, hotter, and ultimately it burned out. We owe it to history and to the millions who suffered and died to remember this story not as a curiosity or a footnote, but as a central thread in understanding how the Nazi regime functioned and why it failed. And we owe it to ourselves to ask how the logic of that era, the logic of enhancement at any cost, shows up in our own lives and societies, and to choose differently. So here is the final answer to the question. Did Pervitin win battles or help cause collapse? It did both in sequence. It won battles in 1940 by turning soldiers into short-term superperformers. It helped cause collapse from 1941 onward by addicting those soldiers, degrading their health, distorting leadership judgment, and reinforcing a strategic overconfidence that led to catastrophic decisions. The regime that dosed its population with methamphetamine in pursuit of domination ended in total ruin, and the drug was part of that ruin. Never again. That phrase must apply not only to genocide and war, but also to the dehumanizing logic that treats people as machines to be chemically optimized and discarded. We are not machines. We are human beings. We have limits. Those limits are not weaknesses. They are features of a sustainable and moral life. The story of Pervitin is the story of what happens when a society forgets that. Let us not forget it again.